Matthew Heineman, you directed the documentary Cartel Land, which was nominated for an Oscar earlier this year. Now it's nominated for 5 Emmys, including Exceptional Merit in Documentary Filmmaking. So first off, congratulations on all that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And you yourself were nominated as, not only for exceptional merit, you're also nominated as a director, a cinematographer, and an editor. What was your reaction to getting that much recognition for all the work you did on the film?
This whole journey with Cartel Land has been absolutely incredible. And, when I heard about the nominations, I was so honored. I was so humbled, and honestly quite surprised. So, I feel very, very lucky.
Now, what's it like to, from a filmmaking perspective, to not only direct the film, but to take part in many of the creative aspects behind it, to sort of have to have your fingers in all the aspects of the production.
Yeah, this is a passion project, and it's a film. It's a verite film. It's a film, experiential film, in which I was embedded with my subjects for almost a year, and so. Whether I liked it or not, I was sort of forced into wearing many different hats. And that's one of the things I love about documentary filmmaking is the ability to wear those different hats, to take part in all those different parts of the production process. It was a crazy adventure. The film went into places that I never could have dreamed of or imagined, but ultimately it was incredibly rewarding experience.
You mentioned being embedded with these groups, with the Autodefensas in Mexico who are fighting the cartels, and a border patrol group in the U.S. What was the degree of personal risk for you as a filmmaker just to get this footage?
It was a terrifying film to make. There's no way around it. I'm not a war reporter. I've never been in any situation like this before. But obviously the film led me into, meth labs in the dark desert night, places of torture, shootouts in the middle of the streets. I had no experience. My last film before this was a film on healthcare in the U.S. So it was really terrifying. But at the same time, I felt like it was a really important film to make. And, I was willing to take those risks because I really believed in the story. I felt like the story had to be told. And so, but to me, there's a lot more in this film than just the sort of, dangerous moments, and I think, in some sense, it's really a character-driven film about the leaders of these two vigilante groups and the journeys that they go on, which again ended up in a way that I never could have imagined.
Yeah, what interested you in those particular leaders in those groups that made you want to tell their stories initially? You have Tim Naylor Foley and the Border Patrol group, and then Dr. Mireles in Mexico. What made them especially interesting to you as subjects?
So I first started making a film about the group in Arizona. I filmed for about 4 or 5 months, and then my father actually sent me an article about the Autodefensas in Mexico. And right when I read that article, I knew that I wanted to go down there and tell this sort of parallel portrait of vigilantism on both sides of the border. I actually reached out to a journalist who had written a profile piece on the doctor, and I called her up and I was like, "What's he like as a character?" And she said, "He's the single most interesting man I've ever been around." And as a documentary filmmaker, those are nice things to hear, even if they're half true. And so 2 weeks later, I was in Mexico filming. I originally thought I was going to be down there for, 1 or 2 weeks, and I'd get enough footage to create this juxtaposition. And, 9 months later, we finished filming. And I was down there for about 1 to 2 weeks of every month for about 9 months.
And the level of access you get to both of them and the work they do on both sides of the border is pretty significant. How did you develop that level of trust to let them to let you sort of capture what they're doing and embed yourself with both groups?
Yeah, I think in this type of filmmaking, trust is everything, and that trust is often begins on the first day of shooting, and it's also the approach. And I think, there's several things that allowed me to get the footage that I was able to get. One, I didn't want to put these guys in nice, neat little boxes. I think I wanted to sort of revel in the complexity of who they were and what they're doing. It's a murky world, the world of vigilantism, and I wanted to, not live in black or white, but live in shades of gray. And I think, even from day one, when I spoke to them, I was very clear. I don't want to put you guys in boxes. I want to let the story unfold naturally, and I think they both appreciated that. I think time played a huge role as well. I spent a lot of time down there in both places, and so they were, especially in Mexico, they were risking their lives to fight for what they believed in, and I was, along with my crew, my small crew, we were risking our lives to tell their story. So I think there's a level of respect that came with that. And I think like most people, people always ask, why does anyone take part in a documentary? And I think, they wanted their story to be told, especially in Mexico. This issue is often sort of characterized and it's in, there's the way it's depicted in Hollywood movies or in TV shows is not really the reality of what happens on the ground. And so I think the ability to show what's really happening in the drug war. I mean, that was really one of my goals, was to sort of take this issue out of the headlines and put and look, how this was affecting people, everyday people on the ground.
Yeah, and in addition to the way it's depicted in media, you have, of course, this coming at a time, when the presidential nominee of a major political party wants to build a giant wall to keep all Mexicans out. Having had the experience of making this film now, what do you think about how border politics and sort of how we relate to Mexico, how that has kind of shaped and kind of in a way warped this election campaign?
I really tried with Cartel Land to not make it a political film. There's no talking heads. There's no, experts telling you what to think. It's really an experiential journey through the character. So, hopefully by showing that, we showed a world that people don't really get to see. As far as, Trump's wall, I don't think it's something that I'd advocate for. I think what we're seeing, what we saw in Cartel Land, and what we see every day happening in Mexico and along the borders is decades of failed policy. The elephant in the room of this film really is America's appetite for drugs. We are funding this war. We are funding this violence through a voracious appetite for drugs. And, if that doesn't stop, none of this will stop. And the cycle will continue. There's a reason the film begins and ends in a meth lab. They're cooking that meth right now in the middle of the forest in Mexico, and continue to do that as long as we continue to consume drugs here in the U.S. And the really sad thing is how this is affecting everyday people in Mexico. Since 2007, over 100,000 people have been killed in the drug wars. 25,000 plus disappeared. And these are staggering numbers when you think about it. And, I think roughly, 3,500 or so people were killed in 9/11. Look how that changed the world. And here we have this violence that's happening right on our doorstep. And we're connected to it. We're responsible for it. Obviously there's much more to it as well. There's failed government institutions in Mexico. There's corruption. There's many other things at play. But at the basis for it's basic supply and demand.
And with the Border Patrol in that group, it does seem to be a mixed bag of motivations. While you see Foley seems mostly concerned about the cartel violence and sort of keeping that out of American communities. You also feature at one point one member of his team who says that different races shouldn't be in the same country. Does it become kind of a fine line between desire for security and order and some more racial animus in terms of how that group deals with the situation at the border?
Look, there's no question there's a wide range of motivations of the folks in Arizona and Puerto Rico. And, you know, we see that vividly in the film. From downright racism that you just pointed out to, you know, a belief that, you know, the cartel is the enemy and that you know, if you talk to most of the guys down there, most of them are veterans. Most of them say some version of this, that they're, you know, they're veterans. They took an oath to serve our country, and that oath doesn't stop when they stop serving. And so in their minds, you know, that the frontier is the new front line, and in their minds, you know, they need to be there to stop it. I think what we see in both groups, both in Arizona, Puerto Rico, and the vigilantes and the auto defenses in Mexico, and one of the things that fascinated me intellectually is the dynamics of these groups, the motivations of these groups, the complex motivations of these groups. And ultimately, that's what leads to the downfall of the auto defenses in Mexico, is you have all these different people who rose up with this belief that they were, you know, fighting the cartels under the cloak of these white shirts they're wearing. And that's really the story that I thought I was telling at first, was the story of good versus evil, almost in the sense of a classic Western. And then over time, the story became much more murky and more gray, and those who were fighting against evil started to become evil.
And the film does kind of end on that kind of a disillusioned note, you know, with the auto defenses. They've grown and been co-opted and sort of became a new cartel in and of themselves. So it does feel like the cycle of power and corruption is almost unavoidable. Do you come away from the film feeling pessimistic, or is there a source of optimism that you feel for the situation on both sides of the border?
Yeah, I often get that question of you know, obviously as you say, the film ends not on the you know, necessarily an upbeat ending. I think, first of all, it's the reality. You know, a mentor of mine in the film world once said that if you end up with the story you started with, then you weren't listening along the way. And I think that's great advice for life, and I think that's great advice for filmmaking. Is listen to the story, listen to what you're seeing, what you're capturing. Let the story evolve organically, and ultimately that's where the story, you know, led me. If I you know, had 1,000 Hollywood screenwriters write and where I thought the story would go, no one could have predicted where it went, with the doctor going to jail, with the movement ending, with it being co-opted by another cartel. You know, I never could have imagined any of these things. I think, that being said, I think it's really important to remember that the movement was born out of this desire to bring order in an orderless society. You know, there's an absolute failure of government institutions in Michoacan in Mexico where I was filming. And, you know, the folks there had no one to turn to. The very institutions that we take for granted here in the US weren't there. And for years, they had been lived under the, you know, ruthless tyranny of the cartels. There's a scene in the first act of the film in which the auto defenses take over a town, and they get surrounded by the military. And there's this beautiful young woman screaming face to face with the army, and her anger is that, you know, her parents and her two brothers were killed by the cartel, but she was too scared to tell anyone. She was too scared because she thought the police, the institutions that are there to protect her, either were the cartel, or being paid by the cartel, or you know, let her out to the cartel. And so that's what they're living with. So it's really important to remember that this movement was born out of an idea that, you know, if no one is going to protect us, we have to protect ourselves. And I think, you know, the one silver lining in the movie and into the movie is that, you know, it did inspire people all across Mexico to stand up and speak out. And as we were editing the movie before I went to Sundance, which seems like a lifetime ago, there's a horrible incident in Guerrero, the state below Michoacan, in which 43 students were killed by the cartel, but in collusion with the government. And this, provoked international outrage in Mexico for sure. And hundreds of thousands of people marching through the streets of Mexico wearing white shirts, speaking out. And so, I find optimism in that. I find optimism in the fact that people are sick of living in a essentially a failed state, where government institutions have failed, and they're standing up and speaking out.
At one point, as you're telling that story in Mexico and following Mireles, he is seriously injured in a plane crash. And at the time, it wasn't clear if that was just an accident or if there was some kind of foul play involved. What was your reaction to that event, not only as a documentarian, but also on a personal level, having spent so much time with him up to that point?
When you make something like this, where you have your craft services and your your 30-person crew and you're disjointed from your quote unquote talent. We were living with them, we were eating with them, we were embedded with them every single day. So I had a relationship with the doctor. Obviously, as a filmmaker, subject relationship, but it's a very unique relationship, and it's a relationship, as we talked about earlier, based on trust and many things. And so I felt obviously deeply saddened. It was very unclear, first of all, what happened right away. If it wasn't for my father's 70th birthday, I most likely would have been on that plane with him, in which people were killed and he almost died himself. And it was very unclear what was going to happen, whether he'd live. And in many senses, that was the beginning of the end of the movement. With him on the sidelines, that's when things really started to fall apart with the movement. And there's a moment there that when he finally came back, that people thought that maybe he'd sort of right the ship, but unfortunately, it was sort of too late.
We have the Emmys coming up, of course, and this was nominated at the Oscars earlier. But what I love about the Emmys is how they devote so much more specific attention to honoring nonfiction programming. There are a lot more categories specifically devoted to reality and nonfiction and documentaries. So what's it like being in that company, not just of the other nominees in your category, but so many other shows like Making a Murderer, Vice, and that bring so much attention to documentary work on TV and online these days?
It's so great. I think it's incredible to have all these categories honored, and I feel so lucky to have the best crew in the world. Matt Porwall, who shot the film with me, Matt Hamachek, Bradley Ross, and Pax Raskin, who edited the film with me. Tom Paul, who's also nominated for sound editing, and his crew. Filmmaking is a team sport, and obviously in documentaries, it's a smaller team than other shows and fictionalized shows, but it's still a team sport, and I feel incredibly grateful to have a wonderful team, and I'm really happy that they're all being honored come September as well.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, and congratulations on the film and on these Emmy nominations. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.